So an interesting topic came up the other day that had me had my mind spinning. And because I've talked about boundaries quite a bit over the years. It's one of the things that I deal specifically with clients is talking about setting boundaries, how to even identify boundaries. Like many people don't really have an idea of what their boundaries are unless they're like a super hardcore boundary. Some of us can identify those, but there's different levels of boundaries. And so I've talked about this a lot in, other videos and classes and stuff that I've done. But something interesting that I was thinking about the other day was specific to military spouses. And because it needs to be approached differently, believe it or not. Um, because boundaries require, okay, so generally, like, right, boundaries require us to be really clear on what we will accept, what we will not accept, and what we won't accept most of the time unless under certain circumstances. So there's certain boundaries that may be a little more flexible. So it's the different levels of boundaries. But the thing about being a military spouse is our life revolves around being flexible. So setting
Mm.
boundaries can actually look very different for a military spouse. And so, anyways, that really had my mind spinning, thinking about, how can I speak to that in a way that military spouses can also still set boundaries that feel good to them. I mean, even some like this is a hard line I won't cross kind of boundaries. And also maintain that level of flexibility that's absolutely necessary for that lifestyle.
Yeah.
So the thing that came to mind was, of course, we need to identify what are things that I'm just not going to live with, right? And we need to be able to speak on those and be very clear. Like I set a lot of boundaries that I BS'd my way through. I did not hold fast to when my husband was serving. So when I got out of the army, for example, I was like, I had this conversation with friends. I was like, I am never going to be a military wife. This is no shade to military wives because I ended up being one, by the way. But I knew what I wanted. I got out of the army because I didn't want to be in the military life anymore. It's why I got out. My husband and I purchased a house when I got out. And so I would have bet money. I was not going to be a military spouse. I was not going to raise children while my husband was serving in the military. And those were boundaries I had set for myself. And I told anybody who would listen, and then push comes to shove, and I didn't hold them. And
Right.
it was fine because my husband and I talked about them. But it's where I realized that I very much, as I look back on it, because at the time I didn't realize it, but I look back on it is where I really would have benefited from being 100% clear, or at least much more clear on where I was absolutely, even though I was saying I was solid at that point, I wasn't, but I didn't really know it, right? So I hadn't worked.
Well, you were saying that personally, like you wouldn't want to do that. But then when you spoke to your husband and he wanted to pursue his goals, like you probably felt compelled, like as a wife, like this is what I'm going to do. But if I had my choice, that wouldn't have been my choice. I could see how that would go into play. But what about like smaller boundaries that they may have set for themselves? Like what would be like a smaller boundary that maybe would still be okay for them to be flexible with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's small is relative too, right? Like what seems
Right.
small to me may or may not be small to them. Like
Well, I
I was
say like,
willing.
okay, I'm going to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, or I'm not going to allow this friend in my life, that type of, I guess those are maybe smaller. I mean, the friend thing is probably a bigger thing, but you know what I mean? Like, what is the something that's not like
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
altering?
So that's where each individual person has to identify and recognize what are my solid boundaries. Like there's no way where for example, could it have been that I wouldn't have married a military man? It could have been. For me, I
Right.
realized it wasn't. That was an area that I came to realize that there was compromise available to us in our relationship around that. So that's where each of us has to identify what am I willing to like what am I not willing to accept ever? What is a
Right.
hard line for me? And you need to be clear on those things so that when they come up, there's not like this, I don't even know what to do with this, right? You've already
Yeah.
worked it through. And to be clear with your spouse and your family on it.
Mhm.
Um, and then there are definitely going to be boundaries that you set because there are the things that make you feel best, like most in flow, like you're really being true to yourself.
Mhm.
And there is going to be a level of compromise available in those. That's like the next level of boundary setting. So you will also have to be able to identify what those things might be. Like, I'm not willing to give up getting an education, but I am willing to go online, right?
Yeah.
I'm not willing to give up working, but I am willing to do it within these particular parameters. I'm willing to do it part-time. I'm willing to do it from home. Like you, each person has to identify what those look like. But for, again, for military spouses, there's some things that we might feel really, really solid about. And then in that military life, you're going to find that those boundaries are really going to be pushed. And that's why I say we have to be very flexible in that particular lifestyle. Our spouse goes places a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and so you have to be clear up front on what you're willing to accept and what you're not, because that very much can, and you have to be very like communicative with your spouse
Right.
because that very much can break or make or break a military marriage because there
Yeah.
is so much that comes up and there is so much that's required of you as a spouse. So you have to be very clear on, who you are, what you will accept, and what you're like, let's talk about it, let's compromise.
Yeah. I
Um,
feel like that is probably um, prevalent in most, situations, but it's probably even more so because you don't have the control over your life when your partner is in the military, right? You don't have that as much control as if you were not in the military.
yeah, absolutely. It's like boundary setting is essential for everybody. There's just so many challenges that come up when you're not clear on what your boundaries are. And to be clear, boundaries aren't just for what we're telling other people we will or will not accept. Boundaries are very much for us.
Yes.
We set
Yeah.
them for ourselves first and foremost. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
everybody's going to deal with them. Everybody really would benefit from getting clear on what you feel your boundaries are. And even understanding, like, when things come up for you, because boundaries can be a really, really hard thing to set at the beginning for most people. I'm actually really, really impressed when people like share a boundary. I'm like, what? Good for you. Because you just don't see it as frequently as you see people not setting them. So they
Right.
can be a really difficult thing to set to begin with. Um, but like really spending time with them and identifying what they are will then help you get into the space of, well, what do I do when I am confronted with somebody trying to push them? Or even when I am like, I said it was going to be solid, but I'm now feeling the need to shift it. And you're going to have emotions that come up around that. How are you going to deal with that?
Right. Right.
So,
I think that's important. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I thought that it was important to kind of bring up the fact that so because they do have so many military spouses who follow and listen to what I'm sharing, and they need to understand like your level, especially if you're kind of a newer spouse, your level of flexibility is
Hmm.
going to have to be on par with like Gumby. Like
Yeah.
you're going to have to be extraordinarily flexible, but that doesn't mean that you can't set boundaries.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's important to understand that, no matter what, you can still establish some boundaries and you might have to tweak them along the way. And, you know, um, it's completely a different scenario because I'm not in the military or a spouse. But when I started my business, one of my boundaries was to not have my email on my phone. And
Mhm.
and I set that boundary, like my personal, no, my work email, not my personal.
Yeah.
And I set that boundary and I maintained that boundary for 9 years. And recently I put it back on there because I've been doing um, a lot less client focused communication and a lot more things that require a quicker response, right? Because if I'm working with my clients, then I would only answer my email once or twice a day. And so now that it's less client focused, I have emails that kind of need to be answered in a faster way. And so I have kind of broken that boundary and put my email back on my phone. And it doesn't bother me, but it took me a minute to really get to the point where I was comfortable with it, because I was
Mhm.
so used to not having it on my phone and not really being available like that, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. So one of the things that happened with us is, so my husband's retired now. About a year and a half he's been retired. So we've kind of gotten into our new groove of him being retired. But for the longest time, I was a stay-at-home mom and I didn't have a business. And so when he was required to answer to somebody else, and he really truly just did not have the say, like he couldn't be like, no, I'm not showing up at that time. You don't really get to do that when you're in the military. So I took on, all of the responsibilities of the house naturally because he was working outside the house and I was only the homemaker. Not only. I think you get what I'm saying. Like not minimizing it, but it was what I was doing. So I took out, like, I did the grocery shopping. We needed errands run, needed something dropped off at this place, picked up at this place. He knew that he could like lean into me because that's kind of what I was doing, keeping the household going. Now, fast forward when I started my businesses, I wasn't holding I wasn't setting any boundaries. So when I was trying to build a business and my husband was like, "Can you pick such and such up today?" I was like, "Yeah, of course, sure, I'll make time, right?"
Hmm.
It wasn't until I started realizing like I'm really truly not putting me and my business first. I needed to set the parameters, right? And so now fast forward to today, I have work hours. I have set work hours for myself. It just happened while you and I were talking. I had 3 text messages come in. They didn't get answered, and they're not going to get answered until I take a break.
Yeah.
But I will still have my husband will still ask. And I know that it's not from a place of disrespect. I think it's from a place of conditioning. I work from home during the day. I've always gone, yeah, okay, I can take care of it. I'll do it when I take a break. I'll do it when I do this. And we've gotten to the place now where I have figured out what my boundaries are. No, I will not do unless it's hard press, family's health, life kind of thing. Um, I'm not doing it during my workday.
Yeah.
And when I shared that with him, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. I might be able to do it after I pick up the kids. I'm working during the day, so I won't be able to handle that. The response is fantastic. Okay, no problem. Like,
Yeah.
but I had to establish it, right? So that I was clear on it and I can hold fast to it. And so that he was aware, sorry, babe, that's my work hours. I won't be able to do that stuff at that time. So
Yeah. And I think that that's important to, establish some work hours, because I know the way you are is after your work hours, you're not distracted by work anymore. You're not paying attention to that any longer because your focus is now on family. And I think that by respecting those hours and the boundaries that you have around them, I think that that just, is super important to actually set it up, because a lot of times people, it doesn't matter if it's your partner or not, people think that if you're working from home, you have total freedom and flexibility. And sometimes we do. And that's one of the benefits of working from home and having your own business and everything. We do have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to things, but we also have responsibilities that other people don't really see, because they think you're at home, you're just watching TV and eating bonbons. What are you doing?
right.
You
Yeah,
know?
if you're going
So,
to have a work from home business, whether you're starting it or you're trying to get more efficient in it and you're trying to like condense as much work into your workday as you can so it's not overflowing into family time, you absolutely have to have those boundaries. So it starts with like what do you want your work hours to be? And then shutting down anything that is unnecessary, outside of work stuff during those hours, and then letting those around know. Or like I said, like muting your phone or putting it on the other side of the room. We've talked about that in other videos, so I won't get into it again here. But yeah, all of like boundary setting lends itself to more productivity in your workday as well.
mhm. Yeah, I think, yeah, a lot of people aren't doing that. That's where I get thrown off track.
I think. I don't want to drag it out too much, but I think if it's not what you want for your schedule and for your business, that's cool. That
Yeah.
I'm not
So
here
I
to tell
like to
anybody what
keep.
you have to do with your time. If you're
Mhm.
looking to be more efficient, right? If you're looking to only have set work hours where you're not doing work on the weekends or, at your son's baseball game or whatever it is, then absolutely that's a place where you start looking. You look at the
Yeah.
boundaries and, where could you be more productive during the day? How could you make that reality for you?
Yeah. I've, kind of set Fridays up to be like an open day, open catch. So if I need to schedule an appointment or something like that, I try to do them on Fridays so that I have, really focused on the 4 days a week, and then I have those other days off.
Yeah.